Beneath the ocean's surface lurks a creature that has captivated human imagination for centuries: the shark. While these ancient predators are often portrayed as ruthless man-eaters, the reality is far more nuanced. Shark encounters with humans are infrequent, and fatal incidents are even rarer. However, recent years have seen an uptick in recorded interactions. These marine hunters typically feast on smaller aquatic life and invertebrates, with larger species occasionally targeting sea mammals. Human attacks often stem from curiosity or confusion, particularly when swimmers' movements mimic those of typical prey. Here are 6 stories on attacks. The year was 2009 in Mossel Bay, a South African coastal town rapidly earning an excellent white shark activity reputation. Nestled in the Western Cape province, about 400 kilometers east of Cape Town, this picturesque harbor town was a haven and favorite haunt for shark researchers and thrill-seekers alike. The unique ecosystem of the area and the nearby Seal Island, inhabited by vast numbers of Cape fur seals, had made this enclave among the finest hunting grounds for one of the ocean's most feared predators, the great white shark. In front of turbulent waters, something extraordinary happened in marine research. On one particular crisp autumn morning, Dr. Nomsa Kumalo, a 38-year-old marine biologist who was terrified of seaweed for reasons not entirely explicable, was getting ready for what she thought would be a typical research dive. It was more than 10 years that Nomsa had spent her life studying shark behavior. Her determined eyes told of all the hours spent regarding those magnificent creatures. Her research partner, the watchful Saifo and Lovu, meticulously checked over their equipment as his locks were all neatly tied back in a practical bun. As Nomsa was zipping up her wetsuit, a sensation of doom she could not explain took hold of her. Maybe it was from the unusually choppy sea, or maybe because her favorite shark-themed thermos had leaked upon her that morning. Either way, she shook it off as pre-dive anxiety and set her mind to work on gathering data on great white feeding patterns. The research vessel, playfully named Jaws and Paws, bumped its way across the Indian Ocean swells with a determined show of power. Peter van der Merwe, an old salt of a mariner with taller tails than teeth and a head full of salt and pepper hair, captained it. Saifo picked out a group of African penguins waddling along a nearby rocky outcrop as they came closer to their destination. Nomsa couldn't help but chuckle at that. These kinds of moments made her love her job, seaweed terror notwithstanding. After a final equipment check and a nod to Saifo, Nomsa plunged into the calm waters of the Indian Ocean. Soon, the first chill gave way to tranquility as she descended into the blue depths. Schools of yellowtail darted around her, their silvery bodies flashing in the filtered sunbeams. Nomsa began her survey, carefully documenting her observations on a waterproof tablet. It was just about 45 minutes into the dive when everything changed. The plentiful fish vanished as if driven away by some phantom. Nomsa's instincts shrieked danger. She whirled in the water. Hammerhead pulsed from her pounding heartbeat. She was staring at a living legend. She felt a chill run down her spine as a gargantuan white shark of over 5 meters in length glided noiselessly toward her. Its polished onyx black eyes seemed to bore right into Nomsa. Time just seemed to stand still as the diver and the apex predator regarded each other. Two creatures at the very top of their respective food chains in a realm where neither truly belonged. The scenarios ran through Nomsa's head in a mad gallop. She knew full well that panic at this point in time would only trigger the predatory instincts in the shark. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for her shark deterrent, an electromagnetic gadget hailed to ward off sharks. But then, as would be expected, Nomsa's luck had always been questionable. The device buzzed feebly before falling silent again. Provided she survived this encounter, Nomsa made a mental note to file a complaint with the manufacturer. Maybe curious about this stranger in its territory, the great white began circling Nomsa. Gracefulness came with every propulsion of its powerful tail, edging closer and closer with each pass. It was then that she knew she needed to think fast. Nomsa's hand tightened around the handle of her spear gun, a tool she hoped she'd never have to use against the very creatures she'd dedicated her career to protecting. Nomsa kicked off the bottom as the shark swung around for a second look. She narrowly avoided the impressive rows of teeth belonging to the beast. Surprised by its fleeing prey, the great white twisted in the water. Namsa took the opportunity to fire her spear gun, aiming for the sensitive gills of the shark. The spear hit its mark, and the shark recoiled in pain and disorientation. But she knew very well that this was far from over. She started ascending frantically as her lungs screamed for air. Enraged, the shark gave chase immediately. Namsa could feel the displaced water from its powerful tail urging her to swim faster. No sooner was this thought played through her mind than her bursting lungs did. With a desperate gasp at the surface view, she managed to yell a loud "shark" between gulps of air. Sifo proved quick on the boat, alerting Captain van der Merwe, who steered the vessel toward Namsa with agility for his years. But the shark had not yet given up. It swam circles beneath Namsa. Its dorsal fin sliced knife-like through the water. She felt that the next attack would come from any direction. She flailed at the water, trying to act as far from seal-like as possible while bracing for that telltale shadow beneath the waves. Just as the great white heaved into the final charge, a life ring splashed down beside Namsa. With an adrenaline surge, she took hold of the ring, and Sifo and Captain van der Merwe hauled her aboard. In closure with a clap, the shark's jaws were only a few centimeters off Namsa's flippers, with a spray of seawater sent across the deck. As jaws and paws sped back towards Mossel Bay Harbor, Namsa lay on the deck, gasping for breath. That had been too close for comfort, though. As a scientist, she just couldn't help feeling amazed by that experience. She had just gone eyeball to eyeball with one of nature's most perfectly evolved predators. The experience changed Namsa both as a professional and a private person. She said she had developed a further respect for the ocean and its creatures, and her research had now meant something different. The great white had resumed its rounds off Mossel Bay, a prowling reminder of the wild, untamed ocean. Somewhere in the vast Indian Ocean, a shark swam, with probably a rather odd scar near its gills. Probably thinking back on that bizarre creature it had met that fateful day off Mossel Bay. Way out in the cold waters of the Gulf of Alaska, off the rough coastlines of Kodiak Island, 2015 would prove to be a year bringing a chilling turn of events into a small fishing crew's lives forever. One fresh morning, just when the fog began to lift and revealed the towering outline of Kodiak's mountainous terrain, headed out from the port of Kodiak City was the fishing vessel Northern Star. Its captain was old Ethan Blackwood, 50 years old, a man as stubborn as the birch trees of the tundra. The salmon season had been exceptionally brilliant, and they were all looking forward to a last fruitful haul before the coming autumn storms would force them to seek shelter. With him were first mate Lucas Chen, 35, a former software engineer who had dumped the monotony of desk work for the freedom of the open sea; deckhand Olivia Ramirez, 28, a marine biology graduate who had taken the job to get some first-hand experience of the fishing industry; and the ship's engineer, Gus Peterson, a taciturn 60-year-old who seemed to relate with engines as much as with people. As the Northern Star made its way further into the Gulf laying their nets, they were unaware that these actions were to unleash a string of events that would put their will and test their survival. An unexpected and horrifying way in which the conflict, which would define their journey, would be about to unfold, was soon to overtake them. It was a moment of instinct. While hauling in their first catch of the day, a young, curious, inexperienced orca emerged and entangled itself in their fishing gear. Panic-stricken to free the distressed animal, the crew jerked around to save it, but instead clumsily injured it with a gaff hook. Its distress calls echoed through the water, reaching out to its pod, a family group known by researchers as the Kodiak clan. The Northern Star crew didn't know that they were just angered, probably one of the ocean's most intelligent social predators. Orcas, sometimes known as killer whales, had kin bonds and complex hunting strategies. The matriarchal Kodiak clan, with its cunning family leader, whom the researchers familiarly called Old Scarback, was about to let them see why she was credibly considered an apex predator at sea. The first signs of trouble appeared as Captain Blackwood ordered the ship away from the area, trying to get beyond the immediate reach of orcas to avoid further conflict. A big male orca surfaced off the starboard bow. Its 6-foot dorsal fin sliced through the water like a black sail. Olivia's marine biology training kicked in, and she recognized this immediately as scouting behavior. The orcas were sizing up their target. The attack began with a synchronized ramming of the hull. The orcas rammed into the Northern Star with great force, hard enough to shove the crew off their feet. Gus Peterson lurched his way to the engine room and radioed back that the propeller shaft had alarming vibration levels. The orcas had focused on attacking the ship's means of propulsion. Faced with this grim reality, Captain Blackwood ordered an instant change of course for the nearest shore. But the orcas were one up on them. The rudder refused to budge as Lucas Chen turned to steer the ship. Some damage or fouling of the steering gear by the clever cetaceans had occurred. With their ship effectively crippled, the crew of the Northern Star was at the mercy of the vengeful pod. Waves crashed across the deck, trying to dislodge any crew members foolish enough to venture out in a series of coordinated attacks by the orcas. Much as she was interested in marine life, Olivia found herself torn between professional admiration and primal fear at what the orcas were doing. With all the attacks, the attempt by the crew to call for help became futile. It was as if the orcas knew something about human technology, since they had damaged the communications array while mounting the first attack on the ship. Northern Star was cut off adrift in hostile waters, with a pod of highly intelligent predators out for revenge. Hours ticked by, and the orcas did not leave the boat. Eventually, the panicked crew turned grimly toward a need to survive. Years of experience began to kick in as Captain Blackwood firmly cobbled together a plan. The last hope, to make it through to an uninhabited island he knew just in reach. With makeshift oars fashioned from spare lumber, the crew began the arduous task of paddling their crippled vessel to safety. The orcas, seemingly entertained by the futile effort, permitted them to make slow progress while continuing the psychological warfare of their breaching nearby and hitting the water with their vast flukes. Things took a turn for the worse as night started falling. Now the orcas were ramming the ship's hull below the waterline, which was causing slow leaks that would sink the Northern Star before it could reach the shore. Gus Peterson worked tirelessly to patch up the holes, but it was apparent that time was running out. In a final, desperate gamble, Captain Blackwood decided to burn up the remaining fuel in the ship to create a slick on the water, hopefully holding off the orcas long enough for them to reach shallow waters. As Olivia reluctantly helped implement this ecologically unsound plan, she couldn't help feeling a sense of karmic justice for all the harm they had inadvertently met out. It was a close call. At dawn, the palpitating remains of the Northern Star limped into the shallows of a small island, its hull scraping on the rocky bottom. Unable to follow into shallow water, the orcas wheeled menacingly just beyond the breakers. More shaken than they could have imagined, to say nothing of being beyond exhaustion, the crew fell onto the beach, unable to believe that they had survived. It would be 2 days before a Coast Guard patrol finally spotted their distress signals and rescued the crew of the Northern Star. In those 2 days, they watched with growing horror as the orcas maintained an almost constant vigil offshore, pacing back and forth in a chilling reminder of the power and intelligence of the creatures that they had wronged. It was not so long when a patrol boat arrived, and they were taken to safety unharmed. Later on, the Kodiak clan remained and patrolled their waters, reminding any visitors that one is not necessarily at the top of the food chain in an ocean. The young orca they had injured would be spotted in years to come, swimming strong with the pod and its scars, which are testimony to both human carelessness and the enduring bonds of family in the world of the orcas. Eventually, it was not about surviving but a drastic shift in perspective, of realizing that in this limitless, unpredictable ocean, coexistence is not an ideal issue but plain necessary. It was the year 2012 afternoon when the fishing vessel Sea Whisper cast off from the port of Galveston, Texas, to the wide-open expanse of the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf, known for its rich marine biodiversity and unpredictable weather, had been a hub of human activity since the pre-Columbian period. A turn of events would later happen when least expected. Here was the Sea Whisper, which was a 40-foot sport fishing boat captained by 55-year-old Hank Thornton, a grizzled veteran of the seas with a penchant for colorful Hawaiian shirts and dubious fishing tales. With him, Moderman had his first mate, Layla Rodriguez, a 32-year-old former Coast Guard officer with ice for blood and a dry wit. 2 paying clients, a pair of brothers from Houston 40, and 38-year-old lawyers in search of adventure bigger than courtrooms, named Marcus and Dylan Carver. As they went further into the Gulf, putting the coastline of Texas down to just a smudge on the horizon, Captain Hank would tell stories of his past fishing exploits. Layla, who had heard these tales many times before, began to prepare the fishing gear and did the eye-rolling thing good-naturedly at Hank's wilder exaggerations. The day had been pretty uneventful, with a few catches of smaller fish keeping the Carver brothers occupied. Then everything changed on the Sea Whisper as the sun dipped toward the horizon in a blaze of orange and pink. One of the lines proved to be much heavier, showing the guys that something significant had taken the bait. Dylan dozed in the afternoon heat, jolted by the sudden near-double bend of his rod. The eyes of Captain Hank grew wide. Excitement was written all over them as he immediately realized it wasn't going to be just any catch. Orders bellowed from his throat to Layla to get the gear ready for what was going to be a big haul, while Marcus rushed to his brother's side to help him with the straining rod. The unseen force beneath churned against the brothers as Captain Hank expertly maneuvered the Sea Whisper to give them the best angle. Layla continued to keep watch around her in the waters. Years of Coast Guard service had sharpened her instincts, and her gut was screaming at her that something was off. The water's surface suddenly exploded in a foam spray and thrashed silver. A large mako shark, at least 10 feet in length, somersaulted into the air, its sleek body twisting to shake off the hook. To the Carver brothers, this display of raw energy and beauty made them momentarily forget the strain on their arms. Captain Hank, his face split by a grin that threatened to swallow his ears, yelled encouragement. The kind of catch that could make his reputation in the Galveston fishing community was at hand. His elation was short-lived, however. As the mako crashed back into the water, it made straight for the boat. No one had time to respond when the shark launched itself out of the sea once more, this time clearing the gunwale to land with a bone-jarring thud on the deck of the Sea Whisper. Just then, the mako got very confused and enraged. It began thrashing wildly on the deck. In that frenzy, the great tail of the fish sent this fishing gear flying every which way, while razor-sharp teeth were snapping at everything within their reach. Panic-stricken, the Carver brothers scampered to get as far away as they could until they came near tumbling overboard. With stark terror replacing visions of fishing glory, Captain Hank clung to the wheel, desperate to keep the boat steady as the shark threatened them with a turn. Layla sprang into action. Coast Guard training kicked in, and she read the situation before formulating a plan. With a boat hook, Layla tried to work the shark around again toward the stern, where they could roll him back out of the boat. Then there was the problem of the mako shark's wild and frenzied movements that made the task next to impossible. Every time she got close, the shark's slashing tail or snapping jaws sent her flying back again. The more desperate the situation became, with the boat taking on water from the shark's violent struggles, Layla knew they had to do something to get it to calm down. Then she recalled a technique she had once witnessed a marine biologist use. She explained her plan quickly to Captain Hank, who cut the engine and silenced the boat. The sudden silence without the engine's hum seemed to confuse the shark. It was now that Layla carefully, slowly, moved closer to the mako, speaking low words of gentle nature. Much to the surprise of all, the shark's thrashing slowly subsided. Layla looped a rope around the shark's tail, working fast but cautiously. Now aided by a formerly panicked Carver brother duo, they began easing back the mako toward the stern. Just as they were about to try rolling the shark back into the water, a powerful wave hit the Sea Whisper. Again, the boat lurched as if they all were about to go in the water with the agitated predator. Layla braced herself against the gunwale and used the wave's momentum to push over the shark and get it back into its natural habitat. As the mako vanished into the depths with one last mighty flick of its tail, a collective sigh buckled through the Sea Whisper's crew. Drenched in salt water and sweat, his florid Hawaiian shirt clinging to his chest, Captain Hank slumped against the wheel, mumbling about early retirement. The Carver brothers, their macho swagger now tempered by a healthier respect for the creatures that lived off beauty alone, sat stunned. Layla surveyed the chaos on the deck. Broken fishing rods, scattered tackle, and more than a few new scratch marks on the area, and could not help giving a small, relieved laugh. This was undoubtedly one fishing trip that wouldn't be forgotten anytime soon. As they limped back to port, the tale of their encounter with the Mako shark already growing with every telling, each Sea Whisper crew member reflected on the day's events. Captain Hank humbled his experiences and wanted to concentrate more on conservation in his future expeditions. The Carver brothers, their experience forever changing their perspective, decided to use their legal skills to protect marine life. For her part, Layla realized that marine conservation was really where her true interest lay. Years later, she would become a noted marine biologist specializing in shark behavior and protection. She never forgot her day on the Sea Whisper and used it often to illustrate the respect and preservation of ocean life in lectures. As for the Mako shark, it swam on in the Gulf of Mexico, busy and robust, letting people know just how wild and untamed the sea could be. In the sun-drenched Florida Keys, where turquoise waters kiss golden shores, 2003 brought unexpected terror to a usually tranquil paradise. Key West, the southernmost point of the continental United States, had long been a haven for beach enthusiasts and marine life aficionados. Another kind of hidden danger lurked beneath the gentle waves on this fateful summer day. On this particular day was Thaddeus "Thad" Beauregard Finkelstein, a 42-year-old accountant who lived in Topeka, Kansas. All his life he had dreamed of going away from the landlocked Midwest to a tropical getaway. After years of Thad's incessant pleading, his wife, Prudence Eugenia Finkelstein, finally gave in. Their children, Bartholomew, 14, and Gertrude, 12, were less than over the moon at the proposition of being dragged away from their video games and social media accounts. With smiles on their bright red faces, the Finkelsteins waded into Smathers Beach's warm, shallow waters, never knowing about the creature camouflaged in the sandy bottom. A giant stingray had made this patch of ocean its resting place, nearly 6 feet across. Thad, exuberant, began to play in the water like a child. His swim trunks with a tropical print billowed as he moved in the water. Prudence told him to be careful, but her words were lost in the sound of lapping waves and distant steel drum music. Thad suddenly felt the soft but solid object under his left foot. Before he could react to what was happening, he was overcome with searing pain in his leg. The stingray, feeling threatened by the clumsy step of the accountant, struck reflexively with its barred stinger. Thad's scream reverberated across the beach, and several sunbathers jolted upright upon their towels. Something was very wrong, Prudence realized, and so she waded toward her husband. Bartholomew and Gertrude, for once, looked up from their waterproof phone cases. As Thad stumbled back toward the shore, a leg dragging behind him, leaving a thin ribbon of blood, chaos erupted on the beach. Lifeguards sprinted across the sand, their rescue buoys bouncing comically against their chests. Beachgoers alternated between gawking and fleeing in a bizarre dance of morbid curiosity and self-preservation. From depths she never knew existed within her, Prudence helped Thad to the beach. The lifeguards, led by a lean, muscle-cropped leader named Chip Bronstan, assessed things quickly. Chip declared that the lesion was classic for a stingray barb wound, ordering immediate medical transport. They sat Thad down on a bench to await the paramedics, and Chip told Prudence to soak the wound in very hot water to neutralize the venom. The only available scalding hot water was from a nearby beachgoer's thermos of coffee. The caffeine-addled tourist was unwilling to part with his precious brew, muttering something about vacation-ruining fish. The paramedics gunned their motors and turned on their sirens, which sent a flock of wheeling gulls into an aerial frenzy of wings and squalls. Thad was slung onto a stretcher and hastily tossed into the back of the ambulance, where Prudence insisted on riding along beside him. Bartholomew and Gertrude were left in the care of Chip, who looked about as comfortable with children. Dr. Cordelia Fintacular of the Lower Keys Medical Center took over Thad's care. Specializing in marine life injuries, which were surprisingly common in the Keys, Dr. Fintacular had had many stingray casualties during her time. But because of the size of the ray and where Thad got stung, his was a nasty case. As Thad was whisked into surgery to remove pieces of the barb and clean out his wound, Prudence paced the waiting room. Her children sat there in sullen silence, their phones forgotten in the face of actual drama, having arrived with a very relieved Chip. Finally, out came Dr. Fintacular, her sea-green scrubs making her look like she herself had just emerged from the ocean. She said that Thad would recover, but his rehabilitation was going to be very long and very difficult. The next couple of weeks blurred into a succession of hospital visits, physical therapy sessions, and increasingly creative excuses on Thad's part for why he couldn't return to work at the accounting firm yet. In an unseen fit of logistical talent, Prudence finessed an extension of their trip in Key West, thus turning a vacation gone sour into protracted convalescence. Much to their surprise, Bartholomew and Gertrude had started enjoying unplugged life. Days passed with hikes on the island to learn about the history and the ecosystem from local guides, who were more than happy to enlighten the Stingray family, as they had become known. For his part, Thad embraced his newfound celebrity status. He regaled anyone who would listen with increasingly embellished tales of his encounter with the savage sea beast. Indeed, by the time he was cleared to fly home, the Stingray had grown to about the size of a small yacht in his stories. As the Finkelsteins prepared to leave Key West, they realized how much this misadventure had changed them all. Thad now had a new appreciation for life's fragility and proper respect for the creatures of the sea. Prudence discovered an inner strength and adaptability she never knew existed. The children learned there were times in real life when adventures could outweigh even their beloved virtual exploits. What could have been a tragedy, the Stingray incident, now became a spur to growth and change, teaching the Finkelsteins a lesson about the hidden dangers floating in seemingly safe waters and the hidden strengths within themselves. The calm Mediterranean sea waters off the coast of Marseille, France, shone under the warm summer sun in 2011. Needless to say, this would be the scene that marked the beginning of one of the largest open ocean swims in the world, the Marseille Open Ocean Swim. These swimmers couldn't realize by now that the year's competition would be remembered for many, not because of some athletic achievement, but for many other far more harrowing reasons. Marseille's old port, once an essential foreign exchange center for Mediterranean trade, now provided a colorful scene for both tourists and locals alike. Against this historical backdrop, organizers set out to chart the swim meet with a challenging 5-kilometer twisting route from the nearby Frioul archipelago to the mainland. As the morning sun climbed higher and higher, the water gilding in its glow, and 150 swimmers gathered on the line. One of them was Zephyr Thaddeus Quill, 28, from Brighton, England, all legs and lanky, who had been training for this moment months in advance. Next to him stood Octavia Wren Frost, 35, a big, powerfully stroking local favorite with unrelenting intensity in her eyes. The gun went off and the swimmers vanished with a splash into the brilliant blue waters. It all looked good for the first kilometer. Zephyr and Octavia were neck and neck out front. A foreboding shadow developed beneath the surface as they hit the halfway point. A tremendous swordfish, a medieval-style lance's bill glistening, suddenly launched out of the water. The animal was annoyed by the presence of so many humans in its territory and freaked out, nearly somersaulting in the air. Panic set in as swimmers scrambled to get out of the way of the fish's razor-sharp bill. Zephyr, who was leading, avoided being skewered as the swordfish's bill whisked through the water inches from his body. Octavia's quick thinking did have her scream a warning to those behind her. The swordfish surged on, its aggressive instincts now roused, charging at the swimmers with its tail powering through the water with alarming speed. Lifeguards Luc Beaumont and Aria Soleil were on duty in support boats nearby. They jumped into action, racing their vessel into the fray in a desperate bid to form a barrier between the panicking swimmers and the enraged swordfish. Luc had spent 20 years in coastal patrols with the French Coast Guard, but had never seen anything like this. The battery of swordfish kept coming, and one of them slightly gashed the leg of Hendrik van Meer, a Netherlands swimmer who was entirely behind the others. Blood clouded the water, which might entice more sea predators. In a very gallant gesture, Aria dived into the crimson-stained sea to help Hendrik. Meanwhile, Zephyr and Octavia turned the other way instead of racing to shore and decided to help their fellow competitors. The two swam around, herding the other swimmers together and telling them to close tight. Their strategy was that since they would be intimidated by their size if they pulled together, they had to present a united front against the swordfish. On land, the people had looked on in horror as the drama unfolded. Emergency services were set in motion, and soon the coast was alive with sirens and the thrum of helicopter blades in the sky. News crews rushed towards the beach to report this unprecedented event before a dismayed global audience. By the time Luke had pulled Hendrik back into the water, he had already managed to haul himself aboard the support boat. Arya continued her swim alongside the group of huddled athletes, a calming presence amidst the chaos. The swordfish seemed confused by the swimmers' united front, only circling warily. At this point, Zephyr suggested they all use their swim caps to create some visual barrier. They whipped off their brightly colored swim caps and held them underwater. A wall of undulating color, stunning swordfish-scaring stuff popped up, and the swordfish were taken aback, faltering. Marine biologist Dr. Alara Caspian arrived at the scene as the standoff grew tired. From the deck of a hastily commandeered fishing boat, she broadcast low-frequency sounds with underwater speakers, such as those known to repel certain fish species. The bombardment of this new noise started to make the swordfish retreat. At this moment, Luke and other search operators acted to recover the swimmers. One after the other, tired, shaken athletes were pulled out of the water. The two competing athletes, Zephyr and Octavia, insisted they would be the last to leave. The beach erupted in a cheer as the last swimmers were pulled to safety. Sizing up the situation and finding itself perhaps outnumbered, the swordfish swiftly vanished into the depths whence it came. Just like that, the Marseille Open Ocean Swim was transformed into the Swordfish Siege. Mission accomplished. Afterward, Hendrik was taken care of for his injuries. Not too serious, luckily. Zephyr and Octavia were hailed as champions for their presence of mind and leadership. The organizers of the event, shaken by the experience, vowed to put new safety measures into place at future competitions. The incident reawakened citizenship interest in marine biology among local youth. Dr. Caspian's quick response now inspires young men and women who want careers either in ocean conservation or related science. Luke and Arya were commended for bravery, and their story became a case study in maritime rescue operations. The Swordfish Siege of Marseille became a testament to human resilience, presence of mind, and cooperation in the face of an unexpected calamity. The event further revealed how finely human recreation could exist with wildlife preservation, opening up discourses that would determine marine policy for years to come. In the summer of 2004, in the depths off Nassau, Bahamas, a deep-sea expedition was about to change the lives of marine biologist Dr. Quilon Zephyros and his diving partner, Astria Corallian, once and forever. The crystal-clear waters of the Caribbean Sea, which had forever lured divers and marine enthusiasts with their enchanting and terminally interesting underwater lands, stored hidden dangers no one, even the most seasoned explorers, could have anticipated. Now, on this particular occasion, having grown into a huge tourist hub and the staging ground for hundreds of scientific expeditions, was Dr. Zephyros, who had chosen this place due to its unique systems of underwater caves and diverse marine life, in which he was specializing at the time in deep-sea ecology. As Quilon and Astria dropped down into the dark, their mission was to study the elusive deep-sea grouper species inhabiting this area. Little did they know that their research would turn terrifying. At about 130 feet now, they approached a vast cave system beneath the ocean, known locally as Neptune's Labyrinth. Chiseled into the limestone by millennia of currents, it formed an eerie, otherworldly landscape. Always cautious, Quilon hand-signaled to Astria to be very careful. The farther they swam into the cave system, the stronger underwater lights cast off the rock walls, revealing all kinds of colorful sponges and corals. Quilon's light suddenly caught something totally unexpected. A pair of enormous, unblinking eyes reflecting back at him like marbles from the darkness. Before he could even turn around, a huge form burst from the darkness. It was a giant grouper, at least 7 feet long and weighing hundreds of pounds. Seeing Quilon as a threat since it was startled into its response by his entry into its territory, the fish charged toward him with an incredible burst of speed. Quilon barely had time to dodge as the jaws of the grouper closed within a few inches of his face. The force of the fish's movement sent him tumbling through the water. He was dazed for a second. Astria, who viewed the attack from but a few feet away, immediately swam to her partner's assistance. The grouper, however, wasn't done. It turned and came again, its heavy tail pumping it forward with a great deal of force. Quilon and Astria found themselves in a madhouse race, hand in hand, through the narrow passages of that cave, their heavy diving gear pulling at their every move. While Quilon swam through the twisting tunnels, he was thinking fast. He knew that groupers never attack humans, but this one was really very aggressive. Maybe it was defending a nest, or maybe it had been threatened before by another diver. The grouper, however, was able to follow them with ever-gaining speed. Astria had the presence of mind to pull from her belt a small piece of equipment, a diving flashlight, and began shining it right at the fish's eyes just as it lunged for them, briefly blinding it and giving them invaluable seconds. Quilon took the opportunity to invite them in through a small crevice he had spotted earlier on his way out. It was tight, his last hope, but he squeezed through the opening, where he could hear the frustrated thrashing of the grouper behind, but was unable to follow. Quilon and Astria, their hearts pounding and adrenaline surging, reached the far side of the cave system. They were safe, but it wasn't over just yet. Air supplies were running out, and they now found themselves in a part of the labyrinth they didn't know underwater. They carefully retraced their route, relying on Astria's sense of direction and Quilon's knowledge about how caves formed, until finally, though the time had seemed like an eternity, they saw open water. Breaking the surface first, they gulped for air and clung to each other, at which Quilon and Astria couldn't repress their giggles at so much adventure getting absurd. They had come to study groupers, not be chased by a mad fish. Though terrifying, the incident gave precious data to Dr. Zephyros's research. It emphasized the necessity of continued study on the behavior of deep-sea groupers and the possible effect of numerous human activities on their habitats. From this experience of Quilon and Astria, many more safety measures against such recurrences were initiated during future deep-sea expeditions in that region. For years to come, Dr. Quilon Zephyros would be known for his scholarly contributions and his exciting stories of underwater adventure. That close call prompted Astria Corallian to develop new diving safety equipment, including a grouper repellent, which became part of the standard issued gear to all deep-sea explorers. That encounter with the giant grouper proved a humbling reminder of the capability and mystery of the ocean. More or less, it reiterated the respect due to marine life and a more cautious approach, reverent toward underwater exploration. With each new dive, Quilon and Astria were brimming with the possibility of discovery, and now the knowledge that anything could happen in those vast blue depths.